Hi, Francis.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, I should say. How's it
Hi,
going?
Francis.
Doing well, doing well.
How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, staying busy as always. If it ain't one thing,
Meetings, meetings, right?
it's 10 others, and then 4 or 5 more fires pop up just to make it fun because it's Friday. Sure, we all know how that goes.
Understood. We get that 100%. I haven't introduced you. This is David Smith. He's the CEO over at Voyage. Took
Oh,
over for me when I retired, and I thought for any questions that come up regarding kind of current contract stuff, that kind of stuff, would be best to go through David because he's aware of what's going on where I might not be.
awesome, awesome. Yeah, I know you're posted great in the group. You got so many responses. It was nuts, and that's why I was like, maybe it'd be better if we just did some kind of webinar video, some type of thing. So that way we can kind of just post it up there and they can refer back to it as a resource.
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of questions and there always are a lot of questions that aren't getting answered. And so, what the heck? Let's get them answered, because I don't think there's really any need to not be completely transparent about this stuff.
Right. And so let's go ahead and just start with introductions in case anybody doesn't know. Like, I'm Francis Mize. I run the group Traveling Nurse Jobs 5,000 a week and up. Also run the website, thehealthcarespot.com. And, we're trying to make it easier for the nurses and the traveling healthcare workers, just literally however we can. If it's posting jobs, it's finding housing, you name it. We're trying to be the one-stop shop for everything. And then Noel, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself there.
Noel Curley, former CEO of Voyage Healthcare. I've been in the industry for 25 years. Started Aureus Medical back in 1997 and left them a couple of years later and started my own company. I know a lot of the CEOs around the industry. A lot of them worked alongside of me when I worked at Aureus. So it's an interesting change that has happened to the business over the last 25 years. But a lot of it has stayed the same too. So I'm here to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Yeah, and similar with David Smith, Noel and I are business partners. I joined Voyage a few months ago. Spent most of my career in the banking industry, and so looking forward to putting my stamp on healthcare.
All right, awesome, awesome. Well, like I said, nice to meet you, David, and nice to finally meet you face to face, Noel.
You too, Francis.
So, Noel, you had mentioned there had been a lot of changes over the years. What are some of the changes that you would think would be a good thing for an average traveling nurse now to know versus maybe 20 years ago?
Well, 20 years ago was a lot different. When we worked with hospitals back then, I worked with them directly. It was me and then my candidates. I kind of put the two and two together. There was one recruiter, so to speak, that was on both sides. And back then we were able to send the hospital over a bill rate, which kind of clarified, this is what the rate's going to be. This is our profit, blah, blah, blah. And then we would pass through all of the extra stuff. If you were going to get a per diem, bill directly to the hospital. If you were going to get housing, bill directly to the hospital. If you're going to get a rental car, we'd bill that to the hospital. It was just a lot easier back then because you didn't have these gray areas with these blended rates that popped up, I don't know, 2006 or whenever they started showing up. But I pitch it, when I'm talking to a hospital or whatever, even up to when I retired, I would call the hospital and say, listen, why don't we do it the old way, just to be clear? You get an itemized invoice of everything, and that way we don't have to do all this funny stuff. And it's very complicated when you're doing a blended rate. So as an old timer, I like to itemize, but I don't think that's coming back, even though we try. Occasionally we'll get it, but you kind of see what's going on in the industry now. And I think that's the big crux of what a lot of the nurses and all healthcare travelers are complaining about, is this lack of transparency on the bill rate. And it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And then David, saying you was coming into it from the banking side of things. How do you think it's changed coming to that side, like doing the bank?
Yeah, no, happy to answer that, Francis. And yeah, in a short window, I've found some observations. I think technology has made a significant change in our market space and in our industry, some for the good and some for less good, right? I think the use of things like AI machine learning and automation can be very positive tools so that we can pass that on to our caregivers and so that we can better work with facilities. But it really is all in the application of how you leverage those tools. I've found that a lot of this VMS and MSP world is almost taking some of the people and relationship element out of the business. And so as I put my stamp on Voyage and as Noel and I work on how we can differentiate, it's going back to that, right? Making sure that people first, both our caregivers, our recruiters, and the facilities that we work with, and making sure that we're really serving people's needs. So I think as I look at this industry and go, what can change again for the better, is getting back to our people and leveraging that technology instead of using it to kind of take the human element out.
When you spoke about VMS and MSPs, I don't think a lot of nurses even know what that means. Can you give us an example and explanation of what a VMS and an MSP is?
Yeah, I'll let Noel take first crack at it, and then I'll layer on top. So Noel, why don't you talk a little bit about who we are interacting with on a daily basis?
So all the VMSs most of them are owned by agencies. So it's an agency that's subcontracting to other agencies because they quite simply can't fill all the needs that they have. This started back when Medifist first started it, way back when in 2003 or 2 or so. I can't remember when it was. I think they're owned by AMN now. American Mobile now owns Medifist. So they're working with the hospitals to help the hospitals kind of simplify the process. They get one point of contact, although now it has developed into multiple points of contact, so right back where they were. And I feel like it's a cog in the system. I don't know if David agrees with this or not. He may. A VMS or an MSP, a vendor management system, or what's the MSP stand for, David? Managed service provider, I think is what that stands for.
Really more of a technology platform than the bigger element.
Yep. And there are a couple of them that aren't owned by staffing firms, and but they're getting fewer and far between. And I personally, I kind of go both ways on those things. It's like, it was nice to be able to talk to a hospital because I could get an answer from a nurse manager a lot quicker by, I first started out usually working through human resources, and I'd get the contact information of that person, and then we'd work on the contract. And then a lot of times they would shuffle me off to the direct nurse manager that I was dealing with. And it was a lot easier because I don't need to go through 8 people to get an answer of, what's the color of the scrubs. It just is ridiculous that it takes 3 days to get back an answer like that. When we were, before, I had personal relationships with the nurse managers. I could just call her on her cell phone. She'd be like, blue. And that's the answer. And I could get back to a nurse quickly instead of making them wait, delay. And it's these delays in timing that are killing the industry, because a nurse applies for a job on let's say a Monday. It could be Friday before we even get an answer. And then the nurses maybe already found another job. So it's slowing down the ability of staffing firms to staff hospitals. Now, we work directly with a few facilities, and we like doing that because that's sort of our goal, is to continue finding more and more hospitals where we are direct vendors. We don't have a vendor manager in between, messing up the system, so to speak. And I don't want to talk poorly about them. They have their own business models too, but it is easier for us when we don't have to go through VMSs.
Yeah. And so, Francis, just to attack your question head on, right? So for nurses benefits, the VMSs and MSPs have really come about to create efficiency in the market, right? The tool exists to help with supply and demand. And you would think that would allow us to be able to place more caregivers, right? So more direct relationships, more openness to open positions allow us to do better matching. To Noel's point, what it does is now you've got another player in the value chain. And so that adds complexity and potential delays. So there's definitely trade-offs. There's pros and cons to both sides of it. But the industry is very heavy in the VMS MSP world. And that's where I say they are our partners, and we do work very closely with them. To Noel's earlier point, we just have to remember it's about people, even at the VMSs.
And speaking to your guys' point, I think a lot of the nurses don't know when they do ask recruiters a question, like all the back office stuff, and it's like, well, why can't I get an answer right now? And you guys are saying because you have to go through the VMS, through the MSP, back and forth, there's a lot of links in that chain. And especially the nurses that haven't done this for very long, they don't understand, why I can't get an answer in 10 minutes versus, it takes 2 days to get something done.
Yeah, when you're looking for a new job, there's a human element to that where you go, oh, I interviewed for this and I haven't heard in 3 days. They must not like me. And that could absolutely not be the case at all. You might be the best candidate for the role. It's just that administrative elements that we all have to navigate.
And keep in mind too, when the VMSs are dealing with these submittals, they may get 50 submittals to one position. And we are not allowed, all of us staffing firms are not allowed to call in and ask the nurse manager, hey, do you want my person? In the old days, I'd be able to call up Mary Sue, who's the nurse manager, and be like, hey, Janet really wants the job. And I thought the interview went really well. Do you want to go ahead and book her? And that's when the close would happen and we would get her booked right then and there. We can't do that anymore.
Well, we all know rates are a hot topic. So speaking of working with the VMSs and the MSPs, can you guys break down how the rates are determined? Like how that works? Like, because I think a lot of the nurses, they see the package and they're like, oh, I get this hourly and this is my stipend. And they don't really understand the back office that goes into that, the numbers that go into those numbers. I know everybody wants to make as much as they possibly can, obviously, and the name of the group's 5,000 a week and up. But can you speak to that part of it, like how typically an agency would break down the bill rate and what kind of commissions that an average, average recruiter can expect to make?
Yeah, go ahead, Nolan, then I'll dive into some specifics.
Okay. So realistically, obviously the MSP or the vendor man, let's go with VMS. So the VMS will work with the facility and basically itemize every single job that they do, and we get a list and it's like, here's the rate. And sometimes those are okay. Sometimes they're great. I'll be honest. Sometimes they're great rates and they work. But lately, we've seen, I really monitor through the sites and I see these packages going up. I'm like, wow, these rates have really come down. And they've kind of overcorrected since COVID. So the rates went, they were pretty good when they were like, I'd say 20% lower than COVID rates, maybe 30% lower. But there's some cases where these things are half the rates they were during COVID, and that's not acceptable because the nurses learn to live on COVID money. And like we all do, if you start making more money, you're going to spend more money. And it became very difficult. So there's a little bit of a back and forth going on between the agencies that try. We'll try. We're going to try on every single job order to get more. We're going to call up the vendor and be like, can you give me $5 more an hour or something like that? But I'll tell you, the big agencies are just taking the rate, putting it out there, hoping somebody bites. And it's just not the way we've ever believed that at Voyage. We were there to negotiate. I mean, this is a back and forth. This nurse is not the same as that nurse. We're not taking nurses off the shelves and just saying, here's a nurse. Everybody's different. They've all got their own needs. They live in different areas of the country. So we've got to take into consideration the value of the area when these rates are being considered. Like I said, some of the VMSs do a really good job, some of them don't. And so every time those rates go down, obviously the recruiter rate's going down. I saw somebody post something today on your site that was like, no, maybe it was a different site. They were like, here's what a nurse is making, and here's what a recruiter's making. And they were thinking recruiters are making $300,000 a year. And that is just absolutely not happening. I couldn't name one recruiter in the United States that's making that unless they got 1,000 nurses working for them. It would be impossible with these rates. So I want everybody to know that, hey, this is both sides of the coin scenario. We feel for the nurses, and hopefully the nurses feel for the recruiters as well, because a lot of those recruiters are struggling too. And I think it's temporary. I've been in this business since 1997. I saw the change over in 2001 when we had a turnaround, in 2008 when we had a big old crash. But they always are just kind of slow little crashes. They're not big crashes, and this one's not terrible either. And it'll come around. Hopefully that's going to help a few of the nurses to feel better about it, that it's coming back. I see the rates going back up, but I'll defer that to David because he's really on top of the rates and can probably tell you how much better they're looking on a weekly basis.
Yeah, we are too, and some of my answers can be redundant because I think Noel hit a lot of the core pieces there. But Francis, I appreciate you asking because this is at the crux of what really matters to all of the members that we discuss here. With it really does start at the facilities, right? They have their own budget constraints, they have their own staffing constraints, they have their own goals, right? Some of them want to make sure they have good churn and turnover on their beds. They want to make sure they have a certain capacity for that. Others want to be in a cost cutting and where they land in their fiscal year. I mentioned supply and demand earlier. That's key too. And not just for what facilities. So you've got some regionality in this, you've got some specialty in this, and then you've got some seasonality in this, right? So now as we start to get into flu season, you'll see some moves in rates for certain specialties that'll be more impacted by that. So that essentially determines what I'll call the bid price or the bill rate. And as we mentioned, there could be a vendor management system in the middle, an MSP in the middle, or it could be a direct relationship between the recruiting or staffing agency. Then there's a number of fees that nurses and even recruiters might not be considering, the overhead that it requires to run a staffing agency. And there's been some increased in costs that also conflict on the eventual price that a caregiver might get. We're seeing a big uptick on credentialing costs. We're seeing a big uptick on credentialing requirements. And so one thing that many of our caregivers might not fully grasp is the work we have to do to onboard, right, to those facilities, because it is different, ever changing and evolving and improving. And then insurance has gone up quite a bit since pre-COVID numbers, right? So there's a lot more liability and that gets spread out amongst all of the caregivers. So Francis, I think you asked a direct question about like how much of that might make it to a recruiter or to an eventual caregiver. What I'm seeing in the industry, and we do a lot of market analysis on this, and we use sites like Fusion and Vivian and Indeed, right, to really understand what are competitive rates for specialties in certain regions. Somewhere between 60 and 72% of the bill rate will probably make it to the end caregiver.
Okay,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's a good number. So, so we're saying if some of the caregivers have been asked, would it be more to go work as a recruiter? I don't think they understand. I think the percentage on that is what, like maybe 5-10% top, something like that they get. It's a percentage, so they have to.
Yeah, so we like to say we're the most competitive pricing for recruiters in the industry. I don't think many folks beat us at Voyage. Our entry level commission split for a recruiter is 10% as they become commission eligible, and I think that's very competitive. And that ranges up to at the height to the big rainmakers that Noel was referring to might make 16%, and that's not off of the bill rate. That's off of a gross margin.
Yeah,
Now,
so
not all agencies are going to be the same. There are some agencies that they'll pay a higher salary, but then there's a lot more pressure on those recruiters to make placements no matter what. I'm an old guy. I'm an old recruiter, commission based. Back when I worked for Aureus, we basically the same thing. I haven't changed much about the commission structure since I worked 25 years ago at Aureus, and there's just. I feel like if you have a smaller number of candidates, maybe you got 20 or 30, maybe 40, 50 people working for you, then you can really focus on their needs and maintaining that book of business. So we try to pay so that they don't have to have 150 travelers, because a recruiter with 100 plus travelers is really going to struggle to give any one of those the time of day, because the contracts they'll end at 13 weeks, right? So if you've got, let's say you got 130, make it real simple. You got 130 travelers. That means you got 10 people ending every single week. Imagine your weekly workload if you're just trying to maintain. You've got to find new locations or extensions or whatever it may be for 10 people every single week. That is a very, very stressed out recruiter. And I just feel like it's best to maybe hire more recruiters and have smaller desks. There's got to be a way that there's a balance, because if you've got 36 travelers, or 39, nice easy, that's only 3 people ending every week if you're doing 13-week contracts. So that sort of gives you a look into their weekly growth pattern. Can you grow? Maybe not at 39. You might not be able to do it because you got 3 extensions or redeploys every week. You might get 1 additional person. So it does become very complicated and hard to do, but I'm still an advocate for recruiters just keeping that smaller desk and being paid a little bit more money. And that's a challenge in the industry right now with the rates that are going on.
Yeah, and Francis, I think to your point about would nurses make more as recruiters, it really depends on the specialty. But it also, although our recruiters get to really have an impact on people's lives, it's a different skill set and a different kind of drive in your belly, right? Than what someone, bedside would want to do.
So I've done both sales positions and an RN. And the thing about sales is you don't get the clock out. If people are texting you at 5, 6 o'clock at night, weekends, holidays, times with your kids, you're not responding to those, customers, whoever they are. They're not going to be your customers for long. So as a nurse on the floor, it's stressful. It's hard. You're multitasking the entire time. Literally lives are at risk. But when you clock out, you're done for the day.
Right.
You don't have to sit there and deal with it. Whereas with a lot of sales positions, it's almost a 24-hour job. Whether you do great or whether you don't do great, you can make awesome money as a traveling nurse, obviously. You can also make awesome money in sales, but yeah, to your guys' point, it's a lot harder in sales and a lot more effort to get.
Oh, it's an 80-hour week. I guarantee you that. For the folks that are running a larger desk of 40 plus nurses billing, I mean, that's an 80-hour week. And one of the things that I encourage nurses, whenever I'm talking to somebody that really doesn't understand the industry, and I talk to a lot of folks that are like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, okay, so let me explain it like this. We're a lot like realtors, right? So we're like real estate agents. We have to be available when our customer wants to view the house. Same thing here. We have to be available when they're available. So if I've got a night nurse that wants to talk at 5 a.m, I've got to wake up and talk to that nurse. On the flip side of that, I also encourage nurses to be a little bit careful, because you wouldn't do what you do to a real estate agent that you do to recruiters. You pit every recruiter against every other recruiter, which actually brings the rates down big time. The recruiters start fighting and it just becomes ridiculous. That's the reason that you don't work with 3 real estate agents on your house at the same time, is they won't do it, because they need to focus on getting you the work. If we're working with a candidate, an OR nurse that wants to go to Missouri, for instance, I need to be able to work Missouri. But if I got a nurse that's working with 18 other recruiters and I'm working Missouri and I find her a position, all of a sudden I'm like, why am I putting in this effort? So it's taking the effort down when you're pitting all these recruiters against each other, because nobody wants to work for you now. So think about those things when you're working with recruiters. They do deserve respect.
Yeah, I find that basic customer service is lacking in a lot of places. And if people can just treat each other with respect and we can get along, I mean, we all, at the end of the day, we all got families to feed, we all got bills to pay, and a house to put over, a roof to put over our head, and that type of thing. So I'm not a fan of bashing anyone's, hustle, no matter what that hustle is.
Right.
So yeah, I see in the group where they'll start trashing rates and stuff like that. Which, as long as it's civil and they're talking about money, money's money. I don't care if they talk money, that's fine. But any kind of personal attacks or anything crazy that's not called for. It's not needed. We don't like that on the floor. Oh, you're fine. Keep my my bottle of water right next to me the whole time too.
Yeah. So dry out here in Colorado right now. It's like, I don't know, 1% humidity.
Oh, well, it's about a good 80-90% in Florida. So
yeah,
then you get it the other way. Now, speaking to the nurses working with the recruiters, how much wiggle room would you have, or would you suggest, like coming from the nurses' side, if they get presented with a package, can they counter offer? Can they
100%.
say, so how
They should.
what would be that process? What would you recommend nurses do from their side when they're really looking at some place and they like it, but maybe it doesn't fit their budget?
Don't think that the recruiter is doing anything nefarious, because a lot of times what the recruiter is doing is going off of a sheet, right? So the computer pops out this number and the number says, all right, well, this, but that doesn't mean, it's just like a car sale, right? You can go, hey man, can you give me another $1,000 off? And that guy goes to his manager and the manager comes back with $400 or whatever. You know how that game works. We try not to do much of that. If a nurse has a number, send me the number. If someone comes up, I'm going to be honest, there are recruiters out there that will do that just to kill a deal. They will just offer a stupid number to kill a deal. And those are the ones I don't like those guys. I don't like guys that do that just to be mean, because we want to just get this done and get this nurse back to work. And there are some questions that have been popping up on your side a lot lately is about the overseas stuff. And we're trying to figure out what's going on there, because are they a registered U.S. agent? If they're a registered U.S. agent, then of course they're taking out taxes the way they're supposed to. But what about matching funds? The 7.65% FUTA. Are they taking that money out and sending that into the government, or is that left on the table? And that's where they're getting their profit by stealing from the government. I don't know. We're going to figure this out, because 7.65% of a $100 bill rate, $7.65. That's a lot of money that could be going to that nurse if that's what's going on. But in the reality of the situation, we have to take out the FUTA, and then we match those funds. That's part of our cost. And so that creates an unfair disadvantage to companies that are in the United States that are paying the taxes the way they're supposed to be. I'm still going to research it. I'm going to continue to find this out. There has to be something. There has to be something.
You're
Yeah,
sorry.
There's a couple of pieces I want to add on that, Francis, and especially with the group being 5,000 and up, it's kind of a different conversation than if we were dealing with folks making 1,600 or 2,000, right? I think Noel hit on a couple of important beats there: taxable versus non-taxable, and not comparing blended rates in a vacuum, right? And understanding what the true impact of those rates are. I say to your question of like, should they negotiate rates? No question is a bad question in a staffing experience, but no is also an acceptable answer, right? So that's where you want to be able to be a smart consumer, to know your information. And then I would just implore our caregivers to look at the total situation. Are you going to a facility that you like, that you either have some knowledge of, or that your firm's already placed candidates at? Are you going to be happy there, right? Are you doing the specialty that either you are experienced at and want to do, or that's growing you in the right way, right? And there's a ton of other, what I'll call non-negotiables. So what I would ask is, I wouldn't lose a great contract with a recruiter that you like and trust over $100 when you're making 5,000 a week, right? We got to kind of think of price as one of the variables.
No, 100%. Like a lot of things, there's certain areas that, let's say they're not the best areas, so you're taking a lot of risk for the money. Nurses have had their cars broken into and had all kinds of other stuff happen. So yeah, there's definitely,
it's guaranteed. Or is it housing a known commodity, right? Are you going to be OT eligible, and how does your overtime make up for it? So I find like price is a regular discussion we have every day. But often it's kind of short-sighted and really looking at like, what's my hourly rate or what's my weekly rate without all of those other variables in consideration. But I would say be a smart consumer, find out what's out there, and definitely ask.
And the recruiter should be knowledgeable of the area. I saw someone post something, it was maybe Redding, California or whatever, for like $2,500 a week, and with no housing, you have to get your own housing, all this kind of stuff. And I saw that and I was shocked. I was like, there was no way. There's just absolutely no way that you could survive on that kind of money in California. It just is impossible. The rates they have to be knowledgeable of the area to know that rate the hospital sent over, the VMS sent over, is not going to work. There's no way that's going to work. And that's when the recruiter has to go back and say, pump the brakes. We need to talk about this rate. If you really want to get somebody in there, which it sounds like the hospital is desperate, we've got to jump that $20 an hour to cover housing and travel costs and all those kind of things. You can't do it for what you're doing it at this rate now. And do you really need somebody? And that's where we as recruiters will be like, I'm not staffing that job, because I won't do that to my nurses. And I wouldn't do that to the facility, because then the nurse is going to get there, they're going to get mad, they're going to go home, they're going to leave them even shorter staffed. And that's a real problem for those facilities.
Yeah. And to that vein, our account management team, our business development team, our leadership team is basically the agent for those recruiters and caregivers, and are asking for those extras, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, like you guys were talking about with the MSPs and the VMSs, sometimes, and I don't think nurses understand that, say a certain, VMS puts out a contract from a hospital, it might hit one agency and they take their cut, then it goes to the next agency and they take their cut, then it goes to the next agency. It might be 4 or 5 agencies in between you, that VMS, and that hospital, and that's why that rate is super duper low.
Usually it stops at one. I don't know of anybody that does them sub. Like if I'm a subcontractor for AMN but AMN owns Medifist, I don't know what they get out of Medifist. I mean, it's just part of their portfolio. But if I'm doing that, yeah, there's AMN involved, but I'm only dealing with Medifist. I'm not getting a sub rate, right? That's where they kind of draw the line, which makes sense because, oh my God, imagine trying to get an answer in that scenario.
And I'm thinking that's kind of maybe what some of these really super low rate ones are doing. You know what I mean? When you see it, like they're going through different ones. I
They're,
can't
ta-
say, yeah.
they're taking something. They have to be.
I think they're just taking a higher commission off of it or something like higher off.
No, look, I think a lot of what you're describing, Francis, makes sense. So to Noel's point, we don't see that. We as a staffing agency won't work a third level, right? We'll only do one step removed from the facility,
Right.
but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The reality is for all of our staffing agencies, what we want to do is have the most available and high quality jobs, the most high quality nurses, and so that we can do the best matchmaking we can.
Yeah, which makes absolute sense. A good recruiter can make or break your your contract. I've had both. I'm not going to name any names, but I've had some recruiters that everything you wanted was done. It was the big thing is pay. If the pay just comes in, it comes right. That's just the basic. When you're 4 or 5 weeks into a contract and you're still trying to figure that out, that really sucks, and it's stressful on top of what you're already doing. So having a recruiter that can, go to bat for you and get things done, and and a company that can back you up too. There's certain ones, like I said, I won't name names. You try and get a hold of them, you can't. You get a voicemail, you get an email that you have to email. There's no physical location anywhere near where you're at, type thing, which can make it rough for the nurses side when you're trying to get stuff done. I think a lot of that was during COVID, and everything was a mess during COVID too. So, I don't even if I could name names, I'm not going to, but that could have been a COVID related thing. But just from the nurses side,
But that's why I harp on price so much, right? Is you definitely need to be competitive and you need to know where you fall. But I do believe that caregivers that focus primarily on price are missing all of those other elements that you just described, Francis, right? You want a staffing agency that can support you, that can get to the right person at the facility. You want a recruiter that knows, likes, and trusts you, that's competent, that cares about you, that has integrity and also has bandwidth to support you. So that's where I go, let's not forget about the people and go on the Zillow of healthcare and go, where can I get the best price? That's not the answer for where the industry is today or where we're headed.
I also think, Francis, there's an element to this too, where it's really hard to compare apples to apples. What we analyze our whole system of compensation on an annual basis. We look at what are the things that we need to provide our caregivers so that they can have a nice life. And a couple of years ago, we added fully paid health insurance. We cover the health insurance for the traveler 100%. I don't know how many do that. We didn't really go out and price that out. We just felt it was something that needed to be done. Do they offer a 401k we offer a 401k with full matching funds, 3%. And so and that's a day one. We don't make you wait 5 years to get it like some of these big corporations do. You get it day one. It's your money. We don't want you sticking around for a $1,500 401k if you hate us. So that's why we do it the way we do it. And then what are the other benefits? What are all the things that you can offer? But the intangible is the recruiter and the quality of the recruiter. I could name 100 great recruiters in the 25 years that I've worked with it, but I can't name 1,000. And I've worked with thousands. So maybe even 100 to stretch. A good recruiter is organized. They're intelligent. They understand the industry. They don't call a transesophageal a different name than what it is. They know, you get these pronunciations, you can pretty much tell what their knowledge base is in the industry. And understanding the entirety of the healthcare system is really important for a recruiter, because you're not just working with a med-surg nurse. You've got the ORs, the CVORs, all these kind of different things that you deal with in the nursing industry. Plus, we also deal with diagnostic imaging with CT techs, X-ray, ultrasound, echo, MRI, all the different things that we do that, coming from my background in nuclear medicine and the kind of things that we all learned when I started at Aureus, we're very knowledgeable about the machines, the equipment, the procedures that have to go on, questioning you about whether or not you do what it is that you say you do on your resume, to make sure that there's a match between the hospital. I don't want to send somebody in there and be embarrassed. because I didn't ask a couple questions that I should have. I want to cover those bases completely. That's a lot harder to do in today's environment because we're not talking directly to the hiring authority.
So do you think anyone that has a nursing background, has a radiology background, those type of people, do they do better in the recruiting space? Or do you think people with more of the sales background, like maybe coming from auto sales or some other type of sales, would do, in your experience, do better? Because you can kind of, it's kind of hard to go and know, like you were saying, know the whole medical industry in entirety, but it's also hard to generate leads, to track down leads, to do the whole sales process and all
Yeah.
that too. So do you think it's better, or it just doesn't matter in your experience from the people that you've met going
Well,
in?
I came in from the medical industry. I worked in physical therapy and occupational therapy and rehab, that kind of stuff. And so my understanding of the hospital system was pretty in depth. I knew what was going on. And then I came into sales, and the first year was tough. I'm not going to lie, because you're moving around when you're in healthcare, right? You're out. This is a desk job. This is a sit there and you're constantly searching for stuff. When I was doing it back in 1997, we didn't even have the internet. So it was really hard back then. I had to really dig in. I had the old blue book. I don't know if you ever saw that thick of all the
The
hospitals.
literal book of business, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so that was hard, but this has gotten easier and the knowledge base is there. So a lack of knowledge by a recruiter, in my opinion, is unprofessional, because you've got all the resources that you have in front of you that you can do the research that you need to. You shouldn't be uneducated. And if you are uneducated, I always found that if I didn't know something, I could ask Francis, who's the nurse that can tell me what's going on and explain it to me. And then I've got that, because nurses are always a wealth of knowledge and happy to help.
Yeah, but no, to Francis's question around career changers, right? Whether they come from the medical field or from other sales roles and change into this, there's a learning curve in either scenario. Yeah. I would say, Francis, that a purpose-driven salesman is more important than what their prior experience is. And that's why, to Noel's point, if you come from healthcare, you already understand the why we do what we do. An auto salesman or a door-to-door salesman, a churn and burn kind of has been successful by hunting scalps and bringing them home, isn't going to do great in this environment. They really have to understand what placing a caregiver means to them. And so if you'll indulge me for a second, I've got a couple of salesmen, without saying names or too specific on their stories. One of our new recruiters is actually newer to the industry. Their daughter had some issues, under 5 years old, and it were travelers that saved her. And so he said, I want to figure out how to place travelers. We have an account manager who's been in the industry in Omaha for over a decade, and his grandfather went in for a surgery. It was actually coincidentally one of his travelers that supported that surgery. So they found out in post-op that, oh, my recruiter is this individual. And he goes, that's my grandson, right? And so I think those kind of whys are what make for good recruiters and good account managers, more so than what their previous experience is.
Okay, yeah, because we have gotten a lot of people asking in the group, what would people think about maybe switching over, trying a different career role. Funny enough, I heard a statistic the other day that non-bedside nursing is actually the fastest growing area in nursing at the moment. With the telehealth coming out and all the new technologies coming out, I kind of get a 360 worldview having the page, because just everything in the world goes on that page. So, and like you said, it's getting harder. It's getting harder for, everyone involved, because they're trying to pull the money out. But it's a cycle. And I don't know if you guys can speak to that as well. I don't think a lot of the new nurses know that there is a cycle to this, that it does go up and down. So there is a plateau and then a valley. And sometimes I've noticed it's more seasonal. I think in the summertime when people aren't having their kids in school, they can travel more. And the contracts might dip a little in the summer, and then school starts. Flu season starts, the goes back up a little bit. Can you guys speak to that with your experience?
A lot of that is budgetary. Many hospitals systems will end their annual year on June 30th. And so July 1st is the beginning of a new year. So you look at May and June and maybe even April, and the money is starting to dry up in the departments. And once the money dries up in the department, it doesn't matter if they need 100 travelers, they're not getting one, because there's no money for it. And that's difficult. Now, one of our account managers, he worked in healthcare before, and he was for like 15 years working for a large system, and he is adamant about this is what happens, and he was, as the manager, the budgetary guy, and so he was the one that really enlightened us on that, the fact that those at the end of that fiscal year, the money is dried up until, in this case, July 1st. Then you maybe get a new CFO that comes in and he's, oh, look at this line item, let's just take that out. That's not always a good idea either, because the line item is important to the health and safety of the patients, as well as the safety of all of your coworkers. You don't want to work short. You don't want to have 12 patients to one nurse. That's very unsafe to licenses, the patients, the hospital system. The lawyers would be having it. If they knew that was going on, the attorneys for the hospital systems would probably have strokes. But they do keep that kind of under their wing a little bit, and they don't tell everybody that they're doing it because they don't have the staff and they got no money to get the staff.
But yeah, so Francis, I think you're right. There's definitely some seasonality. There's some cyclical. I think everybody that's lived through pre-COVID to COVID to now post-COVID understands some of the cycles, but we think that they're going to change, right? The world might look again more like pre-COVID, and we're trying to understand how technology plays a role. Glad to hear you mentioned telemed, because that's on our radar too. It's definitely something that we're watching closely, and it is a growing and budding industry. And then unequivocally, I don't think anyone would argue that, travel does come at a premium, especially in a budgetary element like what Noel was describing to perms. What we have to factor in is what the opportunity costs are, what beds you can't service, what people you have to divert because you're not staffed properly. So.
I've seen a lot more of these contracts where the hospitals are saying that you don't get assigned to one hospital, you get assigned to a hospital system within a specific area. And I think they're doing that for that reason, because they are wanting to be able to have the staff available to go from one hospital to the next, not just tied to one building. And it makes sense for them. It's a little rough I've had where I've worked 4 hours from 8 to noon at one building on a contract, and then they sent me 45 minutes away to another building, and I knew that going in. It was all clearly explained to me by my recruiter at the time. And I'm the type of traveler where it's like, I live out of my car. So if I got to go, 3-4 times a day to different places, and what I got to do, as long as I can safely take care of my patients, and I'm not having to leave in the middle of something that I'm trying to do, or give a med or do something like that, as long as everything's fine, I don't mind doing that type of thing. But
yeah, and nor would a caregiver, right? But now back to your earlier question, looking at the lens is like the business owner. Depending contract on contract, it makes total sense from a facility perspective. It's logistics and it's load management, it's ops management, right? But now what your caregivers probably don't fully understand is that the staffing agency is bearing the brunt of the risk in that. So let's say you go from one facility to the other facility and get in a car accident. Who is now responsible for that? Are you on the job? Are you getting paid for that time? Whose insurance is picking that up? And like I said, it varies really by contract and by situation. So sometimes folks will go, well, I went from one facility to the other. Do I get paid for those 45 minutes? Depends, right? And we probably can, but it'd be at a lower hourly rate, and that might impact your blended rate. So it's a little bit of a dance to make it work for everybody, and to ensure we understand who's bearing the risk in those kind of situations, which, all you did was drive from one hospital to another. You do it every day. You don't really think about like, all right, who's picking up the tab if something happens there?
Yeah, you have to be careful with that, because the non-owned auto policies are very strict.
Right.
They, if you would get injured, it could be a problem. I mean, I had a nurse that worked in Dallas, and she actually was driving to work and got broadsided by a semi and came into the ER where she worked at. Now, she was going to work, so it wasn't an issue. But if that had been something where she was going from hospital to hospital, major problem, major issue, that would have been a legal nightmare.
So it's something that we deal with all the time, and it's that's what the staffing agencies are here to do, is problem solve those exact scenarios.
Yep.
And then it's something I've noticed as well as from the nurse side, like, and once again, I won't name any names, but there's certain websites that will just post ridiculous pays for stuff, and you go to click on it, and they're taking all your information, and the only reason they're taking your information because the next day you get 25 phone calls from 25 agencies. You got 110 emails a day now coming in. I honestly believe that they're posting posts that don't even exist. And I've actually had previous employees from some of these places tell me that they literally do that to get nurses' information to sell it as lead lists to agencies. And
so the money that is out there, which we don't, all of our information for the 25 years locked and sealed as far as I know. I don't think anybody's stolen it, but that a lot of these, this is absolute fact. They are getting that information because a person's vital information is worth a fortune on the black web. And that's why I really caution folks about who you give your information to. When I started to see the companies from overseas and stuff, my radar went off. My bells were ringing. I'm like, this is not okay, because we're regulated, right? We've got all the United States behind it. They tell us what we can and can't do. Cross that border, nobody's telling them anything. And I will bet my house on the fact that that information is out there. So be very, very careful with that information.
Yeah, so just to put a bow in that, we have never had a data breach at Voyage Healthcare.
I don't think so.
No, we have never had a data breach at Voyage Health. But Francis, to your point, there's absolutely predatory pricing. There's definitely predatory marketing. It can be very frustrating to the caregiver. It can be very frustrating to the recruiters, especially when in the mix of those phone calls that you're talking about are genuine people that are there to help you, right? But it is definitely something our nurses should be careful of. And I can tell you, I've had plenty of discussions with our recruiters that get caught up in that trap too, that go, hey, we're paying $4,200, we're paying $4,800, and they're getting offered $5,700. And I go, the revenue's just not there, right? Unless the bill rate's being made up, and it's not. And the facilities are very smart about not offering different bill rates to different staffing agencies. The money just doesn't exist. But it's hard to know that. And to your earlier point, you can only be so transparent with pricing. It only makes so much sense to folks that it kind of requires you to be behind the curtain to know that it's not real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to go line item by line item and list every single expense isn't feasible. It isn't practical. And but I think some of the nurses feel that, since what the hospital's paying is coming down, that's affecting their pay, which they're thinking it's, someone's taking a larger cut when it's not. The money's just not being approved from the budget from the hospital. But coming back around to the predatory agents and agencies, what would you guys suggest nurses do on their end to verify, to make sure that the agent and the agency they're dealing with is reputable, is somebody they should give their information to? Like, what steps would you tell them to take?
I'm going to give you a quick suggestion.
Go ahead, Dave. Yeah, I put it right out there, and I'm happy. If anybody ever has a question, they're like, I'm not really sure about this agent. Hey, I know them all. I know who all of them are. And I think so, pretty much. And if they want to ask and they want to send me a message, I'll answer it. I'll tell you who they are and where they're from and what they're about. There's 25, 30, 40 agencies in the Midwest that all came from Aureus. These big agencies, they got $20 million buildings. They're huge agencies and stuff. They've, MedSol bought Aureus. Who'd have thought? I thought that was impossible. So you've got these big agencies out there, but then you got a bunch of other guys too. But they're all, I'm telling you, they all come from the same place. They all started at Aureus in some way, shape, or form. They are all somehow related to Aureus. It all started there. But now that agency's pretty much gone, as I understand it.
No, I think that's right. Noel hit it on the head. Francis, groups like yours is what's going to support our caregivers, right? When something doesn't smell right, jump on the web and ask your friends, ask your colleagues. And that's where that healthy debate pays off, is because the more information we have, the better. Noel has made himself available. But if you want a firm that you can trust, come to Voyage Health.
Shameless plug there.
Hey, that's okay. Everybody's got to do their thing. I suggest if somebody reaches out to you, don't call them back on their number. Don't either email them back on their email. Find out the company they work for, and then Google that company and get the 800 number, and then call that 800 number and say, hey, is this person an actual employee? Do they work here? If you're getting some weird, area code out of some foreign country when you're trying to call, be real careful about that. People can make up Google numbers. People can make up, WhatsApp numbers and all this stuff that's out there now.
Yeah.
I see the new nurses coming out of college. These are 22, 23-year-old, people that they don't have the world knowledge of, how predatory things are out there. And there is a ton of companies that prey on the healthcare system, both, inside and outside of the U.S. that I've just, you know, like I said, not going to name any names or anything, but just going through this journey and then, you know, now seeing it from the other side. You know, I've never worked. I actually started a recruiting company of our own. Haven't quite gotten anywhere with it, but just the back, you know, the back, figuring out the back office and all this stuff. There's a lot more to it than people would ever imagine. You know, coming from the nurse side, but then also knowing it from the nurse side and seeing, you know, I've gotten 100 emails a day. I've gotten the phone calls, and I'm on the floor so much they killed my phone because I can't just stop and plug my phone in. You know, I'm on a 12-hour shift. By the time it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone's dead because it's literally not stop ringing with recruiter calls all morning. Yeah. So, you know, I get the broader picture, but I don't think a lot of the nurses do get the broader, and especially the new ones coming out. Because I remember when I went to nursing school, they really glamorized traveling. Like that was basically
Really?
being a CRNA or a traveler, and you were the rock star, you know. And
Wow.
yeah. So everybody's trying to go CRNA or they're trying to go traveling. You know, look at the rise of Instagram. You know, you want to be on a mountain somewhere, you know, in your swim trunks or your bikini taking selfies. That's life, you know. That's what all the kids want nowadays, you know. So that's a huge thing. But I think it can be profitable and it can be you know, great for the patients and everyone else to be filling these you know, staffing shortages because we are short staffed literally everywhere. I mean, I've traveled, I've been to Idaho, I've been to California, Ohio, you name it, Philly. Nobody's got full staff, like literally. And
Well, Francis, like we have, what we've got going on right here. I mean, we have a phone system at Voyage that's called Ring Central, and they can just send you that, and you could just have. We're talking about doing this where you actually have the recruiter and the nurse on a Zoom call like this to go over like credentials and stuff like that. I thought it was a great idea. I'm like, that's a wonderful idea, because you know, me being in this from way back when, I've always just done it by phone. You call me on the phone, I know your voice. I'm real good at voices, terrible at faces, real good at voices, but I'm getting better because of this crazy technology we have here. And why not just call up Dave or his team at Voyage, and they'll just put you on here and you could see each other and trust each other.
Yeah. A big quote I use, and I don't even know if I'm citing it right, but I think it was Einstein said, "You can't see eye to eye unless you're face to face." And in this new world where we do less kind of face to face interactions, Teams, Zooms are great for that. So that is something that to Noel's point, we are implementing a lot more of
I
seeing
like it.
caregivers face to face.
I
I
like
like
it.
it.
I like that idea. I've literally taken contracts over text messages, gotten paid, and completed a contract. Never even spoke to the recruiter. Not one time on the phone.
But this would have made you feel a lot more comfortable, right?
There's definitely a human element to it, and I think a lot of it depends on the individual. I mean, if you're new, you're starting off, you need a lot of support. This, you know, having a Zoom, being able to see face to face, you know, talk about, you know, sometimes the nurse wants to vent after a shift, you know, or sometimes the recruiter has, like you said, some kind of medical question, and then we feel good as nurses when people come to us and say, "Hey, I've got this, you know, issue. You know, maybe you can help educate me on this issue." It's literally our job to do that. So
Yeah.
stuff like that.
How much can you empathize or sympathize via email or text message, right? Voice.
We've got a lot of recruiters that use the FaceTime feature on here. You know, they just and I think all of our recruiters are pretty much on a phone to phone relationship, cell phone to cell phone relationship with all of their travelers, because it's just easier, right? And getting on the computer is great and everything, but you know, that's for our note taking, and that could be a little tedious and that kind of stuff. But it is the personal element's got to be there because you're entrusting your livelihood to I liken us to sports agents, right? And so Francis is playing for the Arizona Cardinals. You know, I'm the one that's negotiating his next contract with the front office. You need to work. You need to be out there doing you can't be handling this phone all day long, like you just said. But that's our job. That is really what a recruiter's job is to make sure that you are taken care of. We're your agent.
Right, 100%. And I just think like there's nurses, like I got to the point where I was comfortable with my recruiter. We had already established a relationship. So literally just shot me a message like, you know, "Hey, I got this position, Dayton, Ohio, pays this much. You want me to put you on there?" And I just, yes. You know what I mean? And
it's that easy, right?
Yeah. And it's spectacular when you can get to that point. But I heard a statistic that said after the baby boomer generation, the millennial generation will now be the next biggest generation. So basically my kids, like, you know, the high school kids now, early college, like that's going to be the next huge wave coming out. And so
And
we're
they're smarter than all of us. Trust me, they're way smarter than we are. We're not even close.
on the technology side, yes, but unfortunately, like I see on my page, they're still naive. They're still not. They're still new to the world. Now they have the world's knowledge in their pocket, but at the same time, who's showing them how to use it, check up on stuff, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of stuff with it. Like I said, these certain websites that post jobs that don't even exist. You got these housing sites that post housing that don't even exist, and they let the whole thing fill up with scammers. So nurses send a deposit. I mean, you could literally just go through the page almost every day. There's a nurse saying, "Hey, I got taken advantage of by this housing site," so on and so forth.
Yep.
So they might be highly intelligent, literally have the world's knowledge in their pocket, but they're still naive to the world and the ways of the world. So that's
Well, that's
Yeah.
why that's
And-
why David and I and the team at Voyage, that's why we built it the way we did, is to keep it personal, to make sure that we have these relationships. Because if you trust your recruiter and you get some old guy like me, it's been around for a long time, you're not getting anything past me. I don't think so. And most of the guys that and gals that work at Voyage, they also have a lot of background, a lot of experience. We got 20-year recruiters there. So that person can give you a different experience in recruitment and staffing than you get from, I hate to say the word, fly-by-night agencies, but there have been a lot of fly-by-night agencies in the last couple of years. And that right there is why, David's got this push this year to hire 400 to 500 more nurses on the team. And, he's really doing a good job. And I think it's based on the personal touch and implementing these things like just the Zoom calls for interviews or credentialing, even to help you understand, because you can share a screen. Like maybe the person can't find what it is they're looking for. I can pull it up for them. Boom, there it is. That's how you do it. And we can do it together. And that's just so much more helpful.
I was talking to my son. He's in college in Philadelphia, and I said, "Hop on this Zoom." And he said, "Oh, well, how do I do that?" And I said, "You're a 20-year-old college student. You don't know how to hop on a Zoom? I'm a 43-year-old middle-aged white guy. Like I can figure it out. Hold on, let me YouTube this, because even YouTube's becoming the older generation, just kind of like Facebook's the older generation now too. But
That's a big flex for Dad.
I'm
Good
like,
job.
yeah, well, you don't know. You assume the kids know all the technology when sometimes they don't. Sometimes, like I figure a 17-year-old can probably run all my social media much better than I do. You know what I mean?
I think you're spot on, Francis, about the next wave of the working class, right? And your son's right in the middle of that demographic. We have to remember on the impact of COVID on guys like your son, right? 3 of his high school years, of your formidable years. So they have lower EQ, they have lower life experience. They spent those years at home, right? So digitally, they might be superior intelligence and even knowledge. There's a lot of that. And they get to stand on the shoulders of those that came before them. But there's also stuff that just got missed from that 15-year-old today to 20, 22-year-olds today. I'm a former athlete. Noel is a big time athlete, right? If we think about team sports and the things that you learn in that stretch, they missed out on that. And so now we have to think about when they enter the workforce, how do they get that same teamwork? How do we improve that learning curve, build up EQ? And it is going to be a rude awakening for 22, 23, 24-year-olds to have to realize what it means to punch a time clock and to put in some hard work, right?
Yeah, my 21-year-old son's first year of college was right here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He never left.
COVID
He had
changed.
to go to school in the morning and ski in the afternoon. It was real hard on him.
But it will be hard when he starts working for me next year.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this has been great, guys. I think this will be great information for the nurses. I'm going to wrap this up and get it posted and stuff. Is there anything you guys wanted to close out with, like any kind of closing thoughts or anything?
I'm pretty happy. I thought it was a great little session. I think we've given a little information. I'd like to do it as many times as you want to do it. You let me know. I think questions from the nurses out there too would be really interesting to hear. I do get a lot of questions about starting staffing companies, so that's a tough one. Maybe you and I can talk about your situation. I can help you there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so, like I said before, the quick commercial is Noel is active in your group. So if there are questions, we'd love to hear feedback, comments, pro, or constructive, and Noel will engage on Facebook. If any nurses are looking for opportunities, they can reach out to me directly and I can get into our recruiting team. I'm David at voyagehealth.com. or you can go to voyagesolutions.com and find out more about us. Same with recruiters. Noel mentioned most of the industry is contracting. We've seen layoffs across lots of the Midwest and a lot of the big players. We are actively growing. We're investing in this business both internally as well as with our caregivers.
So if you're a recruiter,
We're
don't
looking
forget
for you
us too.
Yeah.
Because we're looking for more great recruiters, and we do vet our talent pretty well.
Nice. Yeah. And when it comes down to it, it's all about patient care. I mean, if we don't have bodies in the hospital, then the patients aren't getting the care they need. So every step in that ladder, every rung in that ladder. So agencies, recruiters, managers, the whole spiel, we're all doing it to make sure that when, like you were talking about earlier, you had a recruiter that came in, when it's your child in the hospital, when it's your uncle in the hospital, aunt in the hospital, whatever, they have the caregivers there to take care of them. And they're not, getting one nurse to 50 patients to, they're not getting seen.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Right.
If you've been to the hospital, you've probably experienced a shift where you can hit your bell and there's nobody coming.
Francis, thank you for the platform and for the time. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
Francis, it was
Thank
great.
you guys. We'll do this again sometime soon. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Beautiful.